Chapter 7 The River King. Get these workboats back in the water, Commander. Captain Ribault helped shove the sandy crabs back out to sea, and some of the men had already mistaken his grit for temper. I want a sailor manning each boat. Keep him anchored in the shallows and standing by for escape if needed. Understood, Captain, said Rene. Sergeant, barked Ribault, stage a crescent formation around our workboats. I want 3 lines of infantry, pike spears facing north, another row to the south, but I want you and your arquebusiers in a line facing east. That's the direction the boys came from, and that's likely where the natives will show face. I want match tubes lit and standing at the ready, but keep your guns pointed to the sky. No need to create a problem if there isn't one, you know. There'll be no eager triggers on my watch, Captain, said the sergeant, kicking up sand as he made haste. Ribault turned a stern gaze toward the boys. You know how to reload your papa's firearm, cadet? Oui, Captain, said Tristan. Good. You can stand behind the sergeant and help him as necessary. With pleasure, Captain. Tristan took off after his father. Marcel stepped forward next and saluted. Ready for orders, Captain. In a rough but kind-hearted sort of way, Ribault slipped off Marcel's bow from his shoulder and placed it firmly in the boy's grip. Keep this in your hand at all times, he said, and your arrows within reach. And where should I stand, Captain? Fill the gap between the sergeant and the men facing south. Oui, Captain. Marcel trudged over as the tat-tat-tat of the drums and the toot-toot-toot of a flute beckoned every Frenchman into position. There the boy twiddled his big toe in the sand, dragging it this way, then that. Secretly, he wished Ribault had asked him to stand behind the sergeant, too. With the battle formation ready, the captain signaled for a hush. But even as the drummer raised up his sticks, the beach was without silence. For there was a drumming that still remained. It was a booming hum of instruments, coming from somewhere close within the deep canopy of foliage beyond. The natives had arrived. Ribault held up a fist, cooling the hot blood of any who might wish to react too early. The drums drew closer. Some of the men trembled, but with a right hand to the hilt of their sword, as their left hand clutched the scabbard, ready for a quick unsheathing if need be. The sergeant and his infantry had their arquebus guns poised on wooden poles. The braces would help steady the aim, even as the boiling Florida sun heated up their hairy arms. Tristan crouched behind, with every inch of him hung with spare pistols and pouches of gunpowder. Marcel, lonely and exposed in his little gap between the men, mulled over as to the first thing he'd do if Captain Ribault called for a retreat. Would he run for the workboats without a second looking back? No, Marcel played the hero in his head, staying behind as long as he could, providing covering fire for others to make their escape. Well, that was what he hoped he'd be brave enough to do anyway. Marcel's daydream vanished. The first warrior came through the dark patches between the trees, followed by another warrior, and then another. In their bronze arms, they each carried a bludgeon fashioned with sharp stones and viper teeth jutting out along the blade's double edge. Their bows were as thick as forearms and nearly as tall as a man, and surely they'd be able to crush a skull with one swipe. Hold! Captain Ribault's voice bounced over every helmet as more and more warriors appeared from the forest. Hold! There was a whole throng of warriors now, at least 100. Then a familiar sight popped out from the greenery. It was Left Ear, waving at Marcel with a big, goofy grin. Marcel was taken aback, and it became clear that the native warriors, though they were armed, were not showing themselves to attack, but rather to protect. For among them came their women, dressed in blended layers of moss and deerskins, with jeweled hair like black waterfalls stretching to their knees. Some were strapped with babies, while toddlers followed along at their legs. But these mothers with their hands full weren't hindered from also carrying baskets of corn, bowls of fresh nuts and berries, as well as crispy meats wrapped in leaves. One woman even swung over a thorn bush, using just one arm hanging from a tree limb as her children held on at her hips. The women set the food down on the beach, and the warriors propped their larger weapons into nearby piles, favoring smaller knives to guard themselves as the drums pounded faster and faster. It was a call to dancing. The natives circled about, singing and flailing their arms. Soon, the whole shoreline was consumed with their song. The music announced the arrival of an enclosed throne covered with palms and boughs of magnolia. Pole-bearers carried the chair along, marching over tripping roots and poky shrubs, as if there was nothing there at all. And resting upon the seat inside was one wreathed in a crown of herbs and reeds, and a raccoon tail tied in the top knot of his hair. With a swish of a plumed scepter, which was a bundle of peacock feathers weaved together, the drumming came to an end. The dancers stood aside, the pole-bearers halted and lowered the chair to the sand. The one inside stepped out as fern branches fell before him for a rug. This king, as he looked, stepped forth with the immense thumps of his wide bare feet. He made the sign of a beard upon his face. He was calling the captain out. Ribault strode out to meet him. 2 attendants of his own followed close behind, bearing the banner of the admiral's crest and the seal of France. Beneath their flags flapping in the wind, Marcel thought the captain looked just as impressive as the king. The 2 great powers stood face to face. Well, almost, more like face to neck. Even the shortest of the natives still towered over the heads of the French, and at 7 feet high, this king was the tallest of them all. Again, the king raised his plumed scepter in signal. Instantly, a dozen servants huddled around, each bearing a lengthy stem of palmetto leaf. They stretched out their stems together toward the center and formed a makeshift hut over the pair's heads. The king plopped down, legs crossed, and invited the captain to do the same. The roof above twirled and shifted as the servants walked in a slow circle. The movement of their long-stemmed leaves made for a natural fan of the sweetest air, and the Florida sun, finding the holes, sent down little patches of light as in speckles of gold spilling about the shade. The king spoke first, and gave no turn for what seemed like a very long-winded hour. The captain, of course, not understanding a single word, blushed a bright red, and not just from the Florida heat. Ribault became increasingly irritable as the king went on and on without end, pausing only when a servant crouched over to deliver some freshly brewed Casenna tea, a hot tea made from the leaves of a holly. The king sipped, and then the captain, who pretended to be refreshed and satisfied, though really, Ribault sweated all the more just looking at its steam. Finally, there came an exchange of gifts. The king presented Ribault with a painted deerskin. Its picture portrayed what seemed to be the king's realm along a great river. The captain exclaimed the artistry of the painting to be as fine as anything found in France. Ribault then called for one of the flags on reserve and draped it over the king's neck and shoulders. It was a fine silk flag, dyed blue with the 3 golden lilies of France, la fleur de lis, embroidered on its sheen. There'd be no better gift fit for a king. The ceremony concluded as 2 worlds mingled into one. The sands erupted into a feast as even more food arrived. There was smoked fish, as well as breads of acorn meal and corn flour, each topped with numerous flavors of honey. For plates, the natives passed around branches of cedar cut into manageable squares, and they drank from gourds and water skins, sweetened with herbs. Left Ear, along with some other native children, challenged the boys to a foot race. As it turned out, Marcel tied with Left Ear, and as he put out his hand to shake in good sportsmanship, Left Ear grabbed hold and threw him to the ground. It wasn't that Left Ear was a sore loser, but it was custom, as Marcel quickly found out, to break a tie with a wrestling match. Marcel, of course, had no chance of success, and quickly banged his hand on the sand in forfeit. Ribault fared little better as the king kept close to his side like a vine to an old tree. Between slurps and gulps of the best meal since France, Ribault whispered for help. "Commander, I know neither what's been said nor what's been agreed to. We need to figure out a way to communicate with these people and find out what's going on." René clamped his hand to his hips and pursed his lips, and he started thinking. "We can help!" Marcel rushed over, with Tristan following right behind. "We can find out what they're saying." "That's very nice of you boys," said René. "But it takes a long time to learn a new language, months of training just to hold one conversation. We don't have that kind of time." "But, Commander," said Tristan, "we can understand them right now." Ribault piped in. "You what now?" "Captain," began Tristan, "haven't you ever ordered something to eat in a place where you didn't speak the language?" "Oui," said Ribault. "Lots of times. What's your point?" "Well, Captain," said Tristan, "my father and I were staying at this inn. They didn't speak French there, and we ordered some soup. When he asked for some pepper, nobody could understand what he wanted. Then I gave it a try. I asked the exact same thing, exact same way. Could I please have some pepper? Only difference is I pretended to grind pepper over my soup as I asked. They immediately knew what I wanted." "You're saying you can communicate with these people based on that?" "Sure we can," Marcel grinned. "Didn't you see the king call you over when he made the sign of a beard?" Captain Ribault scratched his great ginger chin. "Now that you mention it, I suppose I did understand him right then." "And he knew you were the one in charge because you had the biggest beard," said Tristan. "Now, wait a minute," Ribault crossed his arms and stiffened his neck. "That doesn't make any sense. Just because I have a beard doesn't mean—" He gaped at the king, who merely gave him a blank stare in return. "Oh, all right, go ahead. If you can find out what he wants, I'll be convinced." The boys kneeled before the king. "We are mouth," signed Tristan, "and we are ears, of man with beard of fire. Who are you?" The king nodded and signed back, mingling in a few words of his own tongue, too. Tristan translated. "He's called Saturiwa, the River King. He's the great one of these lands, and his kingdom stretches on for many days, with many, many smaller kings beneath him." "I see," said Ribault. "Tell him we are grateful for his hospitality, and that we wish to be his friend." Marcel tried next. He bowed reverently, with arms wide open. "Thank you, great one," and made the motion of stuffing his face. "So much food." The boy rubbed his tummy. "Nice feeling in stomach." Gestured a hand to himself and the captain. "We," and pointed to the River King with his other hand. "You." Marcel clapped his hands together and held them tight. "Friends." And hugged Tristan to prove the point again. "Friends." The River King answered back, and Marcel interpreted, with a lot less enthusiasm. "Saturiwa says he wants to be our friend." Ribault raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem too happy about it. What else did he say?" "Well, he says a friend helps a friend in battle," said Marcel, "and Saturiwa asks us to join him in a war against his enemy." René swapped a glance with Ribault, and the two men sighed. "What enemy?" Tristan found out the answer. "They are called the Timucuans, led by a great one in the west known as Olata. They travel across many waters and bring terror to the River Kingdom. They take what they want and spare none in their path." Ribault thought it over and shook his head. "We can't afford to take sides among the natives." "But, Captain," said René, "his kingdom's in danger, and he's asking for our help." "That's why I like you, Commander." Ribault gave René's shoulder a couple of pats. "You're always thinking the best of people. But I've got a nose for this sort of thing, and something doesn't smell right, especially since we've got no way of knowing who's right and who's wrong. We'd just be taking his word for it, and I don't like that." "And this Olata fellow," said René, "maybe he'd tell us the same thing about the River King." "Exactly," said the captain. "So if the natives have a dispute among themselves, that's their business. We simply can't get involved." He turned to Tristan. "You can tell him my answer, cadet." Tristan relayed the message, albeit in his more simplified way. "He says Olata is a king of many riches, and his land is full of treasure. He says if you help him conquer him and his Timucuans, we will be very rich too." "I'm sorry," said Ribault. "We haven't come here to make war with anyone, and we're certainly not going to help this River King expand his empire against a tribe we've never met." Tristan told Saturiwa as much, and the River King pointed to La Trinity, anchored just beyond the shallows, and began to tell the boys a story through many signs. Tristan interpreted. "He says men like us have come before, men from across the great sea, in great winged canoes just like ours. I think he means our ship. and he says the strangers long to make war and look for treasure. Saturiwa asks, are we none of the same tribe as these ones who came before? No doubt he's talking about the Spanish, said Renee. Mm-hmm, agreed the captain. Boys, inform Saturiwa that we're surely not of the same tribe as the people who came before. And then I want you to ask him this. The captain put his 4 fingers together and made the sign of the cross. Does he recognize this symbol? Tristan followed the instructions. He says the ones that came before always carried that symbol on a stick. That's the Spanish, all right, said Renee. And they seem to have quite the reputation around here. We should keep sailing north and get away from this place, quick as we can. I'll admit it concerns me a little, said the captain. But you saw the charts, Commander. This territory is completely uncolonized. Well clear of the Spanish trade route, too. And there's not a map that'll tell you otherwise. Even the Spanish ones. It's not the maps I'm concerned about, said Renee. It's my neck. I don't want to find myself uninvited past Spain's front door. Boys, said Ribault, find out the last time the Spanish were here. Marcel worked out the details. Saturiwa says it was when he was a child. There, said the captain. That's not quite as bad, now is it, Commander? Renee let out a deep sigh and nodded. I suppose not. Captain, said Marcel, Saturiwa wants to know, since we're not Spanish, and we're not here to wage war or find treasure, just who are we exactly, and what are we here to do? Tell him only this, said the captain, with a wild look in his eye. Foot to ground. Foot to ground, Captain? We. Ribault stamped a foot into the sand. That's the difference between us and those who came before. Where the Spanish go, they go to conquer, to make every place into Spain. He swiped his heel across the sand, erasing his own footprint. But the French, we don't try to turn others into France. Instead, we dig in. He slipped his boot into the sand, sinking it deeper and shifting it further until it was well buried. We take on the ideas, the ways of life of those we like best. The captain patted some sand against his boot and scooped on some more. That's what sets us apart. And that's what we've come here to do. To become part of this land and allow ourselves to be shaped by it. To give space to what is already here and learn to be a good neighbor. That's how we French put foot to ground. That's who we are. Marcel and Tristan looked at Ribault. Ribault looked to Saturiwa. And Saturiwa looked back at the boys and sighed. Captain, Marcel began, I don't think he understood a word you just said. What do you mean? Said Ribault. I used signs same as you, didn't I? Well, said Marcel, he just asked if there's something wrong with your foot.